The story begins with a quiet little cabin by the lake, tucked away in a neighborhood called Willow Lake Estates. This wasn't just any cabin, it had been in the storyteller's family for years, passed down through generations. It was more than just four walls and a roof. It was a place of peace, a spot where life slowed down and memories were made. Every summer, holidays, or even random weekends, this cabin became a refuge from the craziness of everyday life. But one day, everything changed. A letter arrived in the mail, plain and official-looking, stamped with the logo of the Homeowners Association, HOA. At first glance, it seemed like another boring notice about lawn maintenance or parking rules, things that usually got tossed aside without much thought. But when the person opened it, their heart sank. The letter said something unbelievable. The cabin no longer belonged to them. According to the HOA, the property had been reassigned to someone else because of supposed violations of the community bylaws. Confused and angry, they immediately called the HOA office to get answers. That's when they met her. She introduced herself as Karen, the head of the HOA board. Everyone in the neighborhood knew who she was. She was the kind of person who always had an opinion on everything. The color of your curtains, how often you mowed your lawn, whether your trash cans were out too early. People whispered behind her back, calling her names like HOA Karen, though never to her face. And now, here she was, sitting across the table at the HOA meeting room, explaining why the cabin didn't belong to its rightful owner anymore. Karen spoke in a tone that tried to sound professional but came off as smug. She explained that there had been complaints about violations. Things like overgrown bushes near the fence, a broken gate that hadn't been fixed quickly enough, and some other minor issues that felt blown way out of proportion. Then came the kicker. The cabin was being given to her son. Yes, her own child. Apparently, he'd always dreamed of living by the lake, and since the current owner wasn't following the rules, the HOA decided he deserved it more. It sounded ridiculous, almost laughable. How could someone just hand over someone else's property like that? But Karen didn't seem to care. In fact, she acted like it was completely normal, like she was doing everyone a favor. When asked if there was any way to appeal the decision, Karen shrugged and said the matter was final. There was nothing left to discuss. Walking out of that meeting, the person felt a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, disbelief. They couldn't believe what was happening. This wasn't just about a piece of land or a building. It was about fairness, justice, and respect. Hadn't their family taken care of this place for decades? Didn't they deserve better than to have it snatched away so casually? Determined not to give up, they hired a lawyer and started digging into the details. They gathered old documents, photos, anything that proved the cabin was rightfully theirs. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear this wasn't going to be resolved anytime soon. Meanwhile, Karen's son moved into the cabin. He wasn't exactly subtle about it either. Loud music blared late into the night, empty soda cans and snack wrappers littered the porch, and the once pristine yard started looking neglected. It was painful to watch. Every time they drove past the cabin, the sight of it filled them with a mix of sadness and rage. How dare someone treat their home like this? How dare anyone think they could just take it away without consequences? Something inside them snapped. If the HOA thought they could walk all over them, they were wrong. Very wrong. That's when the idea hit them. They weren't powerless. Not yet. There had to be a way to fight back, to send a message loud and clear that this wasn't okay. Little did they know what they were about to do next would turn the entire neighborhood upside down and spark a feud unlike anything Willow Lake Estates had ever seen. The person sat in their living room, staring at a stack of old papers spread across the coffee table. There were faded maps, handwritten notes from years ago, and official-looking documents with stamps and signatures. They'd spent hours digging through everything they could find about the property, hoping to uncover anything that might help them fight back against the HOA's absurd decision. Their eyes landed on an old survey map of the neighborhood, yellowed with age but still legible. It showed the original boundaries of each lot when Willow Lake Estates was first developed decades earlier. At first glance, the map didn't seem particularly exciting, but as they studied it more closely, something caught their attention. According to the map, part of Karen's front lawn technically fell within their own property line. It wasn't much, a small sliver of land near the edge of her driveway, but it was enough to make them pause. At the time the neighborhood was built, these kinds of minor discrepancies weren't uncommon. Nobody cared about a few extra feet here or there. But now, it felt like a golden opportunity. An idea began forming in their mind, bold and audacious. What if they used this tiny piece of information to send a message? If Karen thought she could take their cabin without consequences, maybe it was time to show her what it felt like to have her space invaded. The thought made them smile for the first time in weeks. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about standing up for themselves, reclaiming some control in a situation that had spiraled completely out of hand. The next step was figuring out how to pull it off. They called up a local contractor they knew, someone who owed them a favor from years ago. Over the phone, they explained the situation carefully, leaving out any details that might sound too extreme. "I need you to build a fence," they said. "It's going to cut diagonally across my neighbor's lawn." The contractor hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised by the request, but eventually agreed. After all, he owed them one, and besides, it wasn't illegal to put up a fence on your own property as long as the boundary lines checked out. Early one Saturday morning, before most people in the neighborhood were even awake, the work began. A crew arrived quietly, carrying tools and materials. Within hours, a sturdy wooden fence started taking shape, slicing right through Karen's prized front yard. By noon, it was finished, tall, straight, and impossible to ignore. The fence divided her rose garden in half, cutting off access to the side of the house where she parked her car. It looked intentional, because it was. When Karen returned home later that afternoon, fresh from her weekly yoga class, she froze in shock. Her mouth dropped open, and for a moment, she just stood there, staring at the new addition to her lawn. Then came the scream, a high-pitched, ear-splitting shriek that echoed down the street. Neighbors peeked out their windows, curious about the commotion. Some stepped outside to see what was happening, while others whispered behind closed doors. Karen stormed over to the fence, inspecting it up close. She touched it, shook it, and then turned toward the person's house, her face red with fury. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, marching up to their door. They answered calmly, holding the survey map in one hand. "This fence is entirely on my property," they said matter-of-factly. "You're welcome to check the records if you don't believe me." Karen sputtered, unable to come up with a coherent response. For once, she wasn't in charge of the situation. She couldn't intimidate or bully her way out of this. Instead, she retreated into her house, slamming the door behind her. But the fight was far from over. Word spread quickly around the neighborhood. Everyone had an opinion about the fence. Some thought it was hilarious, applauding the clever move. Others sided with Karen, accusing the person of being petty and vindictive. Tension simmered beneath the surface, turning friendly chats over morning coffee into heated debates. Even the HOA board got involved, sending letters demanding that the fence be removed immediately. But the person wasn't backing down. They had proof, and they were ready to defend their actions. Karen, however, wasn't about to let this go either. She retaliated in her own dramatic fashion. First, she installed motion-activated floodlights along her side of the fence, shining bright beams directly onto the person's property every time they stepped outside. Next, she planted rows of dense shrubs along the border, blocking their view and making it harder to maintain the fence. The feud escalated rapidly, each side determined to outdo the other. Despite the chaos, the person couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. For months they'd been pushed around, ignored, and disrespected. Now, finally, they were fighting back and winning. Sure, the fence might not solve everything, but it sent a clear message. They weren't going to roll over and let Karen walk all over them. This was their home, their land, and they weren't afraid to stand their ground. As the days passed, the neighborhood grew quieter, though the tension lingered. People avoided eye contact at the mailbox, and casual conversations dried up. The once peaceful community was now divided, with everyone choosing sides. Yet amidst the drama, the person remained focused. They knew this was just the beginning. Whatever happened next, they were ready. The battle between the two neighbors quickly turned into a full-blown war, with each side determined to outdo the other. Karen wasted no time filing multiple complaints with the HOA, accusing the person of violating community guidelines by putting up the fence. She claimed it was an eyesore, disruptive, and completely unnecessary. But the person didn't flinch. They showed up at every HOA meeting armed with a survey map, calmly explaining that the fence was entirely within their legal property line. Karen's frustration grew with each passing day. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in her own backyard literally. For years she had ruled Willow Lake Estates with an iron fist, enforcing rules others barely cared about and making sure everyone followed her vision of perfection. Now, here was someone who refused to bow down, someone who dared to push back against her authority. It infuriated her that her next move was predictable yet over the top. She installed motion-activated floodlights along her side of the fence. These weren't ordinary lights, they were industrial-grade, blindingly bright, and triggered by the slightest movement. Every time the person stepped outside their house, even just to grab the mail, the lights would snap on, bathing their yard in harsh white light. It felt like living under a spotlight, and it was impossible to ignore. Neighbors whispered about how extreme Karen was getting, but no one dared say anything to her face. But the person wasn't about to let Karen win this round. If anything, her antics only fueled their determination. They decided to escalate things further. After doing some research online, they discovered bamboo, a fast-growing plant that could shoot up several feet in a single season. Bamboo wasn't just tall. It was dense, creating a natural wall that blocked views and noise. Perfect for sending a message to Karen. They hired a landscaper to plant rows of bamboo along their side of the fence. Within weeks, the shoots began sprouting, climbing higher and thicker with each passing day. Soon, Karen's prized view of the lake was completely obstructed. Her once manicured lawn now looked like it was being swallowed by a jungle. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Karen had always bragged about her perfectly curated garden, and now it was disappearing behind a wall of greenery she couldn't control. The feud became the talk of Willow Lake Estates. Neighbors took sides, turning what should have been a peaceful community into a battleground of opinions. Some admired the person's boldness, seeing them as a hero standing up to Karen's tyrannical rule. Others thought the whole thing was ridiculous, siding with Karen and calling the person petty. Tension simmered beneath the surface, spilling over during neighborhood gatherings. What was once friendly banter at summer barbecues turned into heated arguments about property rights, fairness, and who was really at fault. Things reached a boiling point one evening when Karen's son got involved. He had been living in the stolen cabin for months now, treating it more like a party house than a home. Loud music thumped through the walls late into the night, and empty beer cans littered the porch. The person had tried to ignore it, focusing instead on their fight with Karen, but patience has its limits. One particularly rowdy night, they marched over to the cabin, knocked on the door, and asked him to turn the music down. What happened? Next shocked everyone. Instead of apologizing or complying, he laughed in their face. "You think you can tell me what to do?" he sneered, stepping outside. Before anyone could react, he picked up a rock from the ground and hurled it toward the person's house. The glass window shattered with a loud crack, leaving shards scattered across the floor inside. The person stood frozen for a moment, staring at the broken window in disbelief. Then anger surged through them. This wasn't just vandalism, it was an attack on their home, their sanctuary. Without saying a word, they pulled out their phone, snapped photos of the damage, and posted them online alongside screenshots of the HOA's refusal to address their original complaint. The post went viral almost instantly, drawing attention from local news outlets and sparking outrage across social media. Public opinion began shifting in their favor. People started questioning Karen's actions and the HOA's role in the mess. How could they justify taking someone's property and then ignoring such blatant disrespect? Even some of Karen's closest allies began distancing themselves, realizing they might be on the wrong side of history. As the scandal unfolded, cracks began to show in Karen's polished facade. Her confident smirk faded, replaced by a look of desperation. She stopped attending neighborhood events, avoiding eye contact whenever she passed the person's house. Behind closed doors, rumors swirled that she was losing sleep over the situation. Meanwhile, her son seemed oblivious to the chaos he'd caused, continuing his reckless behavior as if nothing had changed. Despite the mounting pressure, the person remained focused. They knew this fight wasn't just about a fence or a broken window, it was about justice. Every step Karen took to retaliate only strengthened their resolve. They weren't backing down, no matter what. And as the neighborhood watched the drama unfold, one thing became clear. This feud was far from over. The legal battle that followed became the centerpiece of life at Willow Lake Estates. It wasn't just about a cabin or a fence anymore. It had spiraled into something much bigger, something that exposed cracks in the foundation of the neighborhood itself. The person decided it was time to take the fight to court, filing a lawsuit against both Karen and the HOA. They accused them of fraud, misconduct, and unethical behavior, armed with evidence they'd painstakingly gathered over months. This is where things got interesting. As lawyers sifted through documents and depositions began, secrets started spilling out, secrets Karen had worked hard to keep buried. During one particularly tense session, an old neighbor testified that Karen had pulled similar stunts before. Apparently, she had a pattern of targeting homeowners who were either absent or vulnerable, convincing the HOA to strip them of their rights under flimsy pretenses. One elderly couple had been forced to sell their home after Karen claimed their overgrown bush violated community guidelines. Another family lost access to part of their backyard because Karen insisted their shed encroached on common property. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a disturbing trend. The testimony hit like a bombshell. People in the courtroom exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Even the judge raised an eyebrow when presented with copies of emails and letters showing how Karen manipulated situations to her advantage. For years, she had operated behind closed doors, pulling strings and bending rules without anyone questioning her motives. But now, all of that was coming to light. Karen tried to defend herself, of course. She argued that everything she did was for the good of the community, that she was simply enforcing the rules everyone agreed to follow. But her explanation sounded hollow, even to her own lawyer. Her composure began slipping, revealing glimpses of the woman beneath the polished exterior, a woman desperate to hold on to power, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, tensions continued to simmer. Curran's son, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, kept living his carefree life in the stolen cabin. Late-night parties, loud music, and trash piling up became routine. Neighbors complained constantly, but he shrugged them off, acting like he owned the place, which, according to Curran, he technically did. However, cracks were starting to form in his relationship with his mother, too. One evening, the person ran into him by chance while walking back from the mailbox. He looked different, less cocky, more tired. After a moment of awkward silence, he spoke first. "Look," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "I know this whole thing is messed up. I never wanted the cabin in the first place. My mom pushed me into it, saying it would be good for me. But honestly, I don't even like it here." His words caught the person off guard. They hadn't expected an apology or any kind of admission from him. Still, they listened quietly as he continued. "She doesn't listen to anyone, not even me. All she cares about is being right and making sure everyone does what she says. I'm sick of it." There was genuine frustration in his voice, a sense that he was finally seeing his mother for who she really was. For a brief moment, the person felt a flicker of sympathy. This kid wasn't the villain, he was just another pawn in Karen's game. But sympathy didn't mean letting go of the fight. If anything, it gave them an idea. Maybe there was a way to turn this situation around, to use Karen's own tactics against her. They thanked him for speaking up and walked away, their mind racing with possibilities. Back home, they spent hours thinking about what he'd said. What if they offered him a deal? Not out of kindness, but strategy. The person drafted a proposal. He could stay in the cabin as a renter, not an owner. In exchange, he'd clean up the mess he'd made, respect the property, and publicly acknowledge that the cabin rightfully belonged to its original owner. It was a risky move, but it might work. If Karen saw her son siding with the opposition, it could weaken her resolve and maybe force her to back down. When the offer was presented, Karen exploded. She called it blackmail, betrayal, and every other accusation she could think of. But her son surprised everyone by agreeing to the terms. He moved out temporarily to clean the place up, apologizing profusely for the damage he'd caused. Slowly, the cabin began to look like a home again instead of a frat house. The shift didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors who had initially sided with Karen started having second thoughts. Some even approached the person privately, admitting they'd misjudged the situation. The tide was turning, and Karen knew it. She became quieter, retreating further into herself as the weight of her actions settled heavily on her shoulders. In court, the final blow came when the judge ruled in favor of the person. The HOA's transfer of the cabin was declared invalid, and Karen was ordered to pay substantial damages for her role in the scheme. The ruling sent shockwaves through Willow Lake Estates. For years, Karen had been untouchable, a force to be reckoned with. Now she was exposed as nothing more than a bully who abused her power. Humiliated, Karen resigned from the HOA board and disappeared from public life. Rumor had it she spent most of her days indoors, avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed by. Her son, on the other hand, stayed in the cabin as a tenant. Over time, he proved himself to be responsible and respectful, earning back a bit of trust from the community. Though the person remained cautious, they couldn't deny that the truce, at least with him, was working. As the dust settled, the neighborhood began to heal. The feud had left scars, but it also taught everyone an important lesson about fairness, accountability, and standing up for what's right. Willow Lake Estates would never forget the summer of the Great Fence War, but for the person at the center of it all, It marked a new beginning, a chance to reclaim not just their property, but their dignity too. The final chapter of the Willow Lake Estates saga unfolded in a way no one could have predicted. After months of tension, legal battles, and emotional exhaustion, things finally began to settle, but not without leaving lasting marks on everyone involved. The court's decision was clear. The cabin belonged to its rightful owner, and Karen was ordered to pay for her role in the mess. It wasn't just about money. It was a public declaration that she had crossed lines she shouldn't have. Karen didn't take the ruling well. For someone who thrived on control and dominance, losing so publicly shattered her carefully constructed image. She stopped attending neighborhood events altogether, avoiding even casual encounters with neighbors. Her once immaculate lawn grew patchy, and the floodlights she'd installed as a weapon against the person were dismantled after complaints from other residents. Some said they saw her curtains drawn tight during the day, hiding her away from 5-7 prying eyes. Whether out of shame or defeat, Karen had retreated into herself, fading into the background of a community she once ruled. Her son, however, took a different path. Living in the cabin as a tenant turned out to be exactly what he needed. At first, it seemed like an awkward arrangement for both him and the person, but over time, something unexpected happened. He started taking real responsibility for the place. The loud parties stopped, the trash disappeared, and the porch was scrubbed clean. Slowly but surely, the cabin regained its charm. One afternoon, the person bumped into him while he was painting the front door. "Figured it needed a fresh coat," he said with a sheepish grin. They nodded, appreciating the effort. Over weeks, small conversations like these helped mend some of the animosity between them. He confessed that moving into the cabin had been his mother's idea, not his. He hadn't wanted to live there in the first place, let alone cause trouble. "I guess I was stupid for going along with it," he admitted. "But I'm trying to make things right now." His sincerity softened the person's heart. While forgiveness didn't come easily, they recognized that he was genuinely trying to change. And maybe, just maybe, giving him a second chance was better than holding on to anger forever. After all, life is too short to carry grudges, especially when the real villain wasn't standing in front of you anymore. As for the infamous fence, it eventually came down not because it had to, but because it had served its purpose. When Karen resigned from the HOA board, the neighborhood dynamic shifted. People started talking again, repairing relationships strained by the feud. The fence, which had once symbolized defiance and resistance, became a reminder of a difficult time nobody wanted to relive. So, the person decided to replace it with something more permanent yet less confrontational, a stone wall engraved with the words "Boundaries define us." It was a subtle nod to everything they'd been through, a statement about standing your ground while still respecting others. The bamboo, though, stayed. By then, it had grown tall enough to form a natural barrier, swaying gently in the breeze. Neighbors joked that it added character to the street, softening the edges of what had once been a bitter divide. Even Karen couldn't argue with how beautiful it looked, though she never said so aloud. Life at Willow Lake Estates gradually returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could get after such chaos. The scandal brought people closer in unexpected ways. Weekly barbecues resumed, laughter echoed through the streets again, and friendships that had been tested were rebuilt stronger than before. The person found themselves invited to gatherings they might have skipped in the past, realizing how much they valued being part of a community, even one as imperfect as theirs. Looking back, the whole ordeal felt surreal. What started as a simple dispute over property had spiraled into a full-blown neighborhood drama, exposing hidden tensions and forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. But it also taught important lessons about fairness, resilience, and the power of standing up for yourself. the person realized they weren't the same person they'd been at the start of this journey. They'd grown tougher, wiser, and more confident in their ability to face challenges head-on. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the lake, the person sat on their porch, sipping a cup of tea. The cabin looked peaceful again, the way it always should have. Inside, memories of family gatherings and quiet escapes filled every corner. Outside, the stone wall stood firm, a testament to everything they'd fought for. Willow Lake Estates would never forget the summer of the Great Fence War. It became a story told at dinner tables and holiday parties, a cautionary tale about pride, greed, and the importance of treating others fairly. But for the person at the center of it all, it was more than just a story. It was proof that even in the darkest moments, justice can prevail and healing is possible. And as they watched the ripples on the lake fade into stillness, they knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the greatest victories.